Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Mom, are you worried about Queenie? I'm worried about her too, but none of my calls are getting through. Bonnie came downstairs and hugged Maggie. It's all my fault. She ran away from home because of me. It's not your fault. Don't blame yourself. I'll get your father to look for her. Maggie patted Bonnie on the hand affectionately. Mom, if it means Queenie will come back, I can just move back in with my adopted parents. Queenie won't be happy if I stay here in this house. Bonnie looked as if she were wallowing in guilt. Oh, you silly child. Don't say such ridiculous things. Both your father and I consider you our most precious baby. We spent 2 decades looking for you, and we're not going to let you leave us again. Maggie hugged Bonnie. Moments ago, she had been worried about Queenie, but right now, the only one she cared about was Bonnie. Bonnie smirked smugly. She would be the happiest person alive if Queenie never came back. It'd be even better if she died while out there. That way, the entire Silverstein family's fortune will be mine. Just then, Bonnie's phone started ringing. She checked to see that it was Leslie calling, so she happily said to Maggie, give me a minute to answer this. Bonnie walked out into the garden before answering. Have you reached, Leslie? She asked sweetly. I'm almost there. I'll take you to a nice restaurant later. Okay, I'll be waiting, Bonnie gushed. Her life now revolved around indulging in all her desires. She could eat, drink, and shop to her heart's content. Life couldn't get any better than this for her. She was even more thrilled that she didn't have to see Queenie around the house anymore. Soon, the day came to an end, and it was time to get off work. Queenie had been standing for half of her shift and had to take in a lot of new information for the other half. At last, it was 6:00 p.m., and everyone started getting off work. Some went home, while others had dates that night. She was the only one left sitting in the staff lounge, and it suddenly hit her that she had nowhere to go. She had neither the money to buy herself a meal nor pay for a night at a motel. She had no single cent on her. She had never felt this lost and helpless before. Although her parents would come and get her if she called home, she just couldn't bring herself to make the call. Her other option was to call a friend, but she was down in the dumps right now and didn't want to trouble any of her friends. Well, perhaps she was just being stubborn. She wanted to prove that she could face all obstacles in life by herself. Queenie couldn't get in touch with Nigel either. She didn't know where he was or where his house was. After recalling how kind he had been to her so far, she didn't feel like troubling him any further. She looked around the empty staff lounge. I guess I can just stay here for the night. The hotel will provide breakfast tomorrow morning, and I can think about the rest after work tomorrow. At 8:00 p.m., Nigel left his parents' home after dinner and started driving back to his place. He turned the music up while driving and began to enjoy his alone time as usual when all of a sudden, he started getting the feeling as if he had left something undone. Soon, a woman's face popped up in his head. He narrowed his eyes. Right. That woman's still at the hotel. She should have gotten off work by now. Where did she go? Did she go home? But she did say she ran away from home and even refused to leave my place last night, so she's probably too ashamed to go home. That means she could still be at the hotel. His brain was telling him to forget about Queenie, but his hands had already started steering the car toward the hotel. Half an hour later, Nigel's distinguished figure made its way across the hotel lobby. He had a pretty good idea of where he could find her. If she were still in the hotel, there was only one place. She could be the staff lounge. He headed up to the floor with all the various lounges. No one else seemed to be around at this hour, and he started checking every single one of the staff lounges until he finally found Queenie all curled up and fast asleep on the couch in the lounge at the end of the corridor. The air was chilly in the air-conditioned lounge, causing Queenie to curl up like a ball. Her hair was tied up, which left her beautiful face clear for all to see. As the light in the room cast upon her, her pretty features looked all the more mesmerizing. She looked even more alluring in her sleep. Nigel had to admit that she was a fairly attractive woman. He started thinking that her fate would have been very different if another man had taken her home instead of him last night. "Hey! Queenie Silverstein! Wake up!" Nigel started calling out to Queenie. However, she was sound asleep and didn't stir at all. Nigel had no choice but to resort to physical means. He started patting her soft, tender cheek with the back of his hand. "Hurry up and wake up, Queenie." Queenie was startled awake at last. She shot up straight on the couch and looked at the man in front of her in fright before realizing who it was. The anxiety in her eyes gave way to a look of childlike surprise. "It's you. Are you here to pick me up?" The look in her eyes and the words that came out of her mouth made her seem like an abandoned puppy that had grown to rely on Nigel. He felt a pang in his heart. Is she really that ecstatic that I'm here to pick her up? He stood up and said coolly, "We have rules in this hotel. Employees are not allowed to spend the night in the staff lounge." Queenie was still smiling. His words didn't affect her sense of joy in any way. She felt as if someone had extended a warm hand out to her at her bleakest point in life. She had just planted her feet on the floor when she suddenly fell back onto the couch. Nigel, who had just turned to leave, turned his head around to look at her. He frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" She was a little too embarrassed to look him in the eyes. She massaged her calves and said, "My legs have gone numb from the way I was sleeping." He turned his head forward and waited patiently for her legs to recover their strength. After a while, Queenie hurried back on her feet again as she was afraid that his patience might wane. "I'm fine now. Let's go." Nigel led the way while Queenie forced herself to walk despite the numbness in her legs. She followed him down to the lobby, and as they strode across the grand hall, walking shoulder to shoulder, the other hotel employees weren't stunned anymore. While they were still envious, they weren't as jealous about it anymore because even those on the night shift now knew that the newbie female employee was just Nigel's distant relative. She wouldn't be marrying Nigel and wasn't going to steal their chance of becoming Mrs. Manson. After getting into Nigel's car, Queenie's stomach began to rumble. She clutched her stomach awkwardly and asked hesitantly, "Have you eaten dinner yet?" "Yes." Nigel's hands rested elegantly on the steering wheel as he drove them out of the hotel compound. "Well, it's almost 9 p.m. Who else would have gone without dinner apart from me? Mr. Manson, would it be possible for me to make a somewhat unreasonable request?" Queenie ventured. He eyed her thoughtfully. An unreasonable request? What's she trying to do now? She got straight to the point. "Can I get an advance of this month's salary?" That's not part of the company's regular practice. He denied her request without missing a beat. He wasn't about to make a special exception for her. "Then, could you lend me some money for food? I'll pay you back once I get my salary. Oh, and with interest too." She was raised in a fairly decent family environment, which resulted in her being bold enough to make such a request without hints of shyness. Other women probably wouldn't dare to ask a man like Nigel to lend them money. They were too afraid of embarrassing themselves. Nope. Nigel still remembered why he decided to take her in. It was to get his revenge, not for the sake of taking care of her. Queenie pouted, but she wasn't angry. She sighed and looked out the window. Her eyes lit up suddenly as she pointed at a large pharmacy and exclaimed, "My family owns that pharmacy." He glanced at where she was pointing. Her family's rich, all right, but she has fallen so low that she needs to borrow money from me now. Sounds like she's leading a great life. He couldn't help but snort as he remarked, "You can just ask your family for money." She had a determined look on her face. "There's no way I'm doing that. My dad kicked me out of the house. I have to survive on my own. From the looks of it now, that's not something you're capable of." Nigel shot her down right away. Queenie bit her lip and glared at him. Does he find it fun to put a damper on my spirits? I don't expect him to comfort me, but he doesn't have to dash my hopes like that now, does he? It's my first time getting kicked out of the house too. So, it's not like I have any experience in this. She rested her head on the door and stared out the window. At the same time, her stomach started growling again. She had no choice but to try and negotiate with her stomach. "Can you be quiet for just one night? I'll feed you tomorrow morning." The hotel provided the employees with breakfast every morning, so Queenie's plan was to hold out until the next morning. Nigel had encountered a lot of childish women before, but he had never seen one as silly and amusing as her. Suddenly, he turned the steering wheel and pulled up in front of a restaurant. Queenie stared dazedly at the restaurant for a few seconds before turning to him. "Are you buying me dinner? Do you suppose I would let you eat up all of my snacks at home instead?" He scoffed as he retorted. She remained seated in the car as she watched him get off. Although he always had a cold and indifferent look on his face, she couldn't deny that he had been nothing but kind to her. She got down from the car and smiled at him. "Mr. Manson, you're only cold on the outside. If you show a little more gentleness, I'm sure that the line of women hoping to be your girlfriend would be long enough to circle the globe. You'll get a girlfriend in no time." Amid her attempt at flattery, she accidentally bumped into Nigel's back, thanks to his abrupt halt. Ouch! Queenie quickly took 2 steps backward and rubbed her slightly sore nose as she looked at him. Nigel turned around and warned coolly, "Stop talking so much if you want to eat." He hated hearing talk about getting a girlfriend. He had no intention of getting one as he considered a girlfriend to be nothing but a nuisance to him. He had chased after a woman for 2 years once. Yet, she was now his cousin's wife and had just given birth a second time. Ever since then, he realized that life as a single man was pretty fulfilling too. Therefore, over the last few years, apart from taking over the family business, he spent his time indulging in his interests and hobbies. Queenie kept her mouth shut. Was I talking too much? Was he annoyed because of it? Heeding his order, she remained silent from the moment they walked into the restaurant until the food was served at their table. However, her expression became a lot livelier once the food showed up. She rubbed her hands in eager anticipation. Nigel didn't plan on eating, so he only ordered enough food for one. He took his phone out and started playing a game. They were the only ones sitting in the restaurant's large dining area. One happily stuffed herself with food while the other sat quietly playing a game. Neither of them spoke, but the atmosphere wasn't tense or awkward. Queenie looked at Nigel from time to time. Once she was full, she rested her chin on her hand and stared at Nigel, who was still engrossed in his game. In that instance, it struck her that he was quite a good-looking man. He had an excellent figure to go with his handsome features. The only thing that was less than satisfactory about him would be his somewhat unapproachable personality. It was strange that a guy like him was still single. She had seen a lot of tabloids attempting to make their fortunes by reporting on various rumors and gossip about him. Once, he streamed with a female streamer, and the news stayed on the social media trending list for 3 whole days. Nigel was fully focused on his game when he felt a pair of eyes on him. He could feel the intensity of the staring. He put his phone away and eyed Queenie as he asked curtly, "Am I handsome?" The woman who had been caught in the act didn't feel embarrassed in the slightest. She nodded her head and said, "You're quite handsome. Don't you know that?" He was speechless. It went without saying that he knew that, but the way she was ogling at him made him suspect that she had ulterior motives. Nigel remembered that he didn't lock the door to his room last night. He made a mental note to do it tonight. Since Queenie was done with dinner, he called the waiter over to settle the bill. They started heading back down to the car. She followed him into the elevator and burped before she could stop herself. Mortified, she quickly covered her mouth, but she kept burping from time to time. She turned scarlet from embarrassment. Nigel did his best to stop himself from chuckling. Even when they got to the car, she was still burping, so he passed her a bottle of water and commented a little irritatedly, "Why did you gorge yourself at dinner?" Queenie was a little upset. It was hard for her to get a chance to eat, so she had to eat as much as she could. Her burping died down after drinking some water, and now that she was full, she began to feel sleepy again. Her eyes began to glaze over a little from the night breeze and the flurry of streetlights flashing past. She gripped the seatbelt tightly and leaned against the window as she dozed off. The car came to a stop at a traffic light. Nigel looked to the side and saw a sleeping beauty beside him. The streetlights softened her features and made her look like a delicate fairy who had never seen the evils of the world. One look at her and everyone could tell that this woman grew up in a sheltered environment and had been doted on her whole life. Nigel kept staring at Queenie to the point that he didn't even notice when the traffic light had turned green. He snapped out of it once the car behind him honked, and he cursed under his breath before driving off. As for Queenie, she slept soundly and didn't wake up throughout the entire trip back. Meanwhile, at Manson's group main hotel, a couple came to book a room, and the receptionists working at the reception desk kept sneaking glances at the female guest. They were shocked. "Isn't that Queenie Silverstein? Didn't she just leave? Why did she come back to book a room with a man?" However, they were soon thankful that they didn't try to greet her because the name on the identification card read Bonnie Silverstein. After watching the couple head toward the elevators, one of the receptionists exclaimed, "She looks so similar to Queenie." "I know, right? I nearly said hi to her. Thank goodness I held myself back." "Do you think they're twins?" "You could be right. Both their last names are Silverstein." The lobby manager looked over, and those at the reception desk immediately fell silent. After all, they weren't supposed to gossip about guests at the hotel. Meanwhile, at the elevator, Bonnie was holding Leslie's arm with a look of satisfaction. Leslie had treated her to an expensive dinner and gave her a gift as well. Now, she was going to spend a romantic night with him at the hotel's presidential suite. This was the best life she could ever dream of. She had a man who adored and doted on her, but most importantly, he was Queenie's fiancé. The fact that she had snatched him away from Queenie made her even more pleased with him. "Once Grandpa agrees to it, I can break off my engagement to Queenie next month. When the time comes, the first thing I'll do is arrange our engagement, and then I'll start preparing for our wedding," Leslie announced eagerly. He was 30, and it was time for him to start a family. Bonnie's smile was a little stiff. Leslie couldn't wait to get married, but she wasn't interested in marriage at all. She only wanted to revel in the joys of dating him. She enjoyed being pampered and doted on without being shackled by marriage. Furthermore, she recalled that Queenie had gotten involved with Nigel, and she was determined to steal away anything that Queenie had her eyes on. "What's the rush, Leslie? Everything's great the way it is right now." Bonnie flashed him a seductive smile and hooked her arms around his neck before getting intimate with him right in the hotel elevator. Leslie was more than happy to respond in kind, and never once did they part from each other as they made their way to the room. Nigel drove into the basement and turned off the engine. He looked at Queenie, who was still sound asleep. He narrowed his eyes as he called out, "Wake up, Queenie." Queenie looked at him with bleary eyes. When she realized they were in the basement parking lot at his place, she smiled and exclaimed, "Oh, we're here." She got out of the car as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as though this was actually her place instead of his. All at once, it occurred to Nigel that she wasn't at all shy about going to his place. They were complete strangers. Did she trust him that much? Didn't she have any sense of caution? His eyes flashed with a devilish glint. He wanted to scare her a little. Queenie rubbed her sore arm as she entered the elevator. As soon as she got in, she saw the man inside the elevator studying her with predatory eyes. She stared blankly at him. "Why are you looking at me?" Nigel purposely tugged at his collar with a hungry expression as he stared at her dangerously. Ding! The elevator arrived at their floor, and the doors slid open. Queenie eyed him puzzledly as she got out. He followed her all the way to the guest room before raising his arms to trap her between his chest and the wall. "Miss Silverstein, you'll have to give me something in return for staying at my house." Queenie realized what was going on now. Is he trying to chase me out? Does he think he can scare me off just like that? She blinked at him and seemed to have mustered up the courage to make a bold decision. "Mr. Manson, let's get married tomorrow." Nigel's hands shot back down as he took 2 steps back. "What did you say?" "Let's get married. Then, we elope," Queenie repeated in all seriousness. It was Nigel's turn to be dumbstruck. "Is that some kind of a joke? Who wants to get married to you?" "You're the one who started joking around," Queenie retorted with a look of innocence. Then, she grew serious and said, "Mr. Manson, wouldn't it be exciting if we eloped? Are you sure you don't want to give it a go?" Nigel wanted to scare her. He didn't expect to be the one getting a shock. It wasn't fun anymore. "Queenie Silverstein, you can stay here in my house, but don't even think about setting your sights on me," he warned. Queenie watched him head off into his bedroom. She chuckled and went into the guest room as well. It was 11 p.m. when Nigel, who lay in bed playing a game, suddenly recalled something. He jumped out of bed and hurried over to his door to lock it. It was only then that he finally returned to bed with a sense of security. He acted as if Queenie was some kind of hungry predator. The next morning, Queenie woke up at 8 a.m. and opened her door to find a bag of clothes outside the room. A warm, fuzzy feeling blossomed in her heart. "That man has actually prepared clothes for me." She took the bag and realized it contained underwear as well. That's quite thoughtful of him. Right at that moment, the door to the master bedroom opened, and the two of them stared right at each other. Nigel saw the bag of clothes in her hand and instantly figured out who had prepared it for her. The only person who could enter his house so early in the morning and knew that a woman was staying with him was his assistant, Cecily Wentworth. No one else could have done it. "Thanks, Mr. Manson." Queenie happily took the clothes and went back inside the room to change. 10 minutes later, Nigel was sitting in the living room enjoying a cup of morning coffee when he heard footsteps coming down from the 2nd floor. He saw a woman dressed in a long, green dress that made her look like a forest nymph who just came out of the woods. Her skin was pale as snow, and the sunlight that came in through the windows cast a glow over her. Even her hair seemed to sparkle in the light. He stared transfixed for a few seconds before snapping out of it. Immediately, he turned away his gaze as if giving the woman any more attention would make her conceited. "Mr. Manson, when are you leaving? Can you drop me off?" "I'm late," Queenie asked frantically. Nigel glanced at his watch before setting his coffee mug down. He grabbed his keys and headed toward the elevator. Queenie followed closely behind. At Manson Group's main hotel, Bonnie was woken up by a call from her mother. The Silversteins realized that Queenie's phone had been off the whole time. Brandon got so anxious that he filed a missing person report with the police, and Maggie called Bonnie to rush her home. Bonnie was reluctant to even bother with it. It's not as if Queenie would seriously go missing anyway. She then woke Leslie up, and the two of them got ready before heading down to the lobby to check out of the room. While sitting on a couch in the majestic lobby, Bonnie could sense just how extravagant the Manson Group's hotel was. All she could think about was what it would be like if she were to become Mrs. Manson someday. Everyone would be so envious. Just then, two people came walking in through the entrance. It was a man and a woman, and Bonnie's eyes flickered over before widening in shock. That's Nigel Manson. And isn't that Queenie? Leslie just finished checking out of the room. He had just walked up to Bonnie and was about to pull her into his arms to leave when she expertly avoided him. She got up and rushed over to Queenie. Queenie. Here you are. Mom and Dad are so worried about you. They're looking for you right now. Queenie was thinking about work when she heard someone calling out to her all of a sudden. She looked up and saw Bonnie running over to her, with Leslie following right behind. She didn't even have to bother guessing. They must have come to the hotel to spend the night together again. Neither of them showed any respect for the fact that she was still Leslie's fiancée. Bonnie was heading toward Queenie, but she swayed her hips and strutted in front of Nigel. Meanwhile, Nigel glanced curiously at Bonnie as he found the woman looked almost identical to Queenie. Bonnie was confident that she was prettier and even more alluring than Queenie, so when she noticed that Nigel was staring at her, she didn't show any shyness at all. In fact, she boldly gave him a suggestive wink. When he spotted Bonnie's flirtatious stare, Nigel suddenly realized that he could discern the two women easily. Their eyes alone were enough for him to tell them apart.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.